Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Back home, Sky News has learned that councils in England will be allowed to raise bills by 6% to help fill a black hole in social care funding. Local authorities say they're facing a shortfall of more than £2.5 billion and need the extra cash to help pay for services for the elderly and the disabled. Jeremy Corbyn accused the government of failing to deal with a crisis in social care as he clashed with Theresa May. Her Prime Minister's questions.
Why can't the Prime Minister listen to those in local government, to the King's Fund, the NHS Confederation, her own council leaders, and recognise this social care crisis forces people to give up work to care for loved ones because there isn't a system to do it, makes people stay in hospital longer than they should, and leads people into a horrible, isolated life when they should be cared for by all of us through a properly funded social care system. Get a grip and fund it properly, please.
In 1997, they said they'd sort it in their manifesto. They had a Royal Commission in 1999, a Green Paper in 2005, the One List report in 2006. In 2007, in the CSR, they said they'd sort it. In 2009, they had another Green Paper. 13 years and no action whatsoever.
Our senior political correspondent Beth Rigby joining us now from Westminster. So spatting over social care. In the meantime, it's sadly lacking.
Hi, Kay. Quite feisty exchanges there between Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May over social care funding. There is a looming crisis, Kay, and we're coming up to Christmas, which is the pinch point traditionally for the NHS in terms of hospital beds. What can I tell you about what the government will announce tomorrow? What they're going to announce is they're going to give councils the power to bring forward planned council tax rises in the next 2 years to help plug that funding gap. So George Osborne had said to councils that they could raise council tax by 2% a year over this Parliament to put money into adult social care. What the government are going to do is let them bring that forward so that they can raise 3% next year and 3% the following year on council tax bills instead of 2% a year for the remainder of this Parliament. What does it mean for people out there? For average council tax bills, your bill will go up by about £46 as opposed to about 30. And the reason that politically they're doing this, Kay, is the government know that there's a big crisis in social care and there's a yawning funding gap that needs to be filled. But also there from Theresa May, who was clearly riled by Jeremy Corbyn, an admission that there needs to be a longer term solution. What I'd say, Kay, is this is a sticking plaster. There needs to be a cure. The local government associations say even with these additional council tax rises, there will still be a £2.6 billion funding shortfall for social care by 2020. And that means that elderly and vulnerable people are not necessarily getting the help they need in their communities. Theresa May is going to be under pressure over this and expect her to offer some sort of package to try and stop the problem as she goes into Christmas.
OK, for now, thank you. Well, now, on the claims that we're facing a crisis in social care funding, the government will announce tomorrow that councils will be allowed to put up taxes by up to 6% to raise money. But critics say it runs the risk of creating a postcode lottery. How so? Rebecca Williams reports.
The majority of pensioners at this day centre admit they're worried about the cost of getting older. They pay to come here themselves. Just a few get grants from the local council.
Germany's 10 times better than what we are. They look after the pensioners. This country is getting to be a third-rate country.
I worked all my life, paid in all my life to a SAMP. I worked until I was 65. And, you know, I'm getting nothing back for it.
From the NA's point of view, any problems with mobilising?
In hospitals, juggling beds and resources is a constant battle. Here at the Royal Devon and Exeter, 60% of inpatients are over 65. And a lack of social care is putting added pressure on the NHS, as many elderly people are having to be cared for in hospitals. It's an issue healthcare professionals are only too aware of.
When patients are ready to leave hospital and to undergo their rehabilitation and recovery at home, the difficulty is that there isn't sufficient community support to enable that. That's the problem that we're trying to solve.
There are plenty of examples of good care. At Olive Tree House Nursing Home in Bristol, they've created Memory Lane, a row of shops reminiscent of the 1960s to help those with dementia remember their past.
But not all care homes can afford facilities like these. And of course, for residents too, there are financial worries because if they've got more than £24,000 worth of assets, they have to pay for care home fees themselves.
And some are concerned that raising council tax precepts will create a postcode lottery of care. For example, in Bristol, bills for an average home could rise by more than £104 over the next 2 years, whilst in Devon it would be around £73. There, the leader of the council insists they're in greater need.
We have one of the highest populations of retired people in Devon. Social care is the biggest single bill for local government now. We're not getting the support from national government. If anything, we're getting reduced budgets if you do the calculations in relation to inflation.
Raising council tax is likely to be controversial, and many insist it's nothing but a short-term fix. Rebecca Williams, Sky News, Exeter.
Let's chat to the Shadow Health Secretary, John Ashworth. Hello to you, Mr. Ashworth. Thanks for joining us on Sky News. On the surface, this seems like a good idea for people who rely on social care.
Well, if the government announced tomorrow that councils can increase the council tax to raise some extra money for social care, I'm not going to be opposed to that. I would be churlish of me. But let's be honest, it's not going to go anywhere near the amounts of money that is needed for social care. The social care sector in this country is now facing crisis, as we've seen in the package just now. A couple of weeks ago, we had the government's autumn budget. That should have been an opportunity for the Chancellor and the Prime Minister to announce that they were giving social care the funds it needs. There wasn't even an extra penny piece in that budget. So we'll look forward to see what the government announced tomorrow, but I fear it won't nearly be enough for what is needed in a sector which, as I say, is facing crisis.
What is needed?
Well, ahead of the autumn statement, experts were saying that there was a shortfall of around £2 billion. That seems to be what the academic advice seems to be. Really, the government need to inject some emergency funding into social care, because the way in which we're treating some of the most elderly and vulnerable people in society with the social care system is nothing short of a disgrace, quite frankly.
Is it because the previous Labour government didn't do enough?
But this government has cut the social care budgets quite savagely over 6 years. Social care in this country has lost something in the region of £4.5 billion. That's a tremendous amount of money. Social care, quite simply, hasn't had the priority that it deserves from this government. Tomorrow could be an opportunity for the government to inject much needed investment into social care. If they announce that council tax bills can go up by an extra 1% on top of the 2% they announced earlier this year, that's all well and good. But social care needs an injection of money this winter. We can't wait until next April.
Yeah, but my question was, if the previous Labour government had done more, you had countless green papers, reports, etc., 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 then potentially we wouldn't be in the position we're in now.
But the government has cut £4.5 billion from social care.
We did that, and I allowed you to make your point as far as that was concerned. My question is not about this government. My question is about the previous Labour government and what you did despite countless green papers and reports, as I said.
Well, we're talking about the spending that this government inherited from the previous Labour government.
No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what your previous government did, and if they had done more, then potentially social care would not be in the position it's in now.
Well, the previous Labour government was putting a tremendous amount of investment into social care. That is the point I'm making, whereas this Conservative government has cut £4.5 billion from social care in the previous 6 years, which is why we are now in a situation where social care is on the brink of tipping point. Now, of course, what we need long-term is a broader solution to social care. We are getting older as a population. As we live for longer, we live with more complex needs. So we all know the demographic challenges we face as a country. So we do need a long-term solution to social care, but we also need an immediate short-term injection of cash because, as I say, experts are saying the social care sector is on the verge of tipping point, and unless the government do something, I'm very, very worried about what is going to happen to some of the most vulnerable and elderly people in our society.
OK, I'm going to try once more. So no guilt at all? at the door of the previous government, Labour government?
Well, the previous Labour government put a tremendous amount of money into social care and indeed trebled the NHS budget in cash terms. What we're now seeing is the NHS going through its largest financial squeeze in its history, and as I say, 6 years of quite savage cuts to social care. Local authorities are seeing huge amounts of cuts. The previous Labour government was giving local authorities more money to spend on social care and other services for the elderly. All this has been slashed back. But yes, you are quite right. What we now need, as well as an emergency injection into social care tomorrow, we need a longer-term solution to social care in the context of a population which is getting more elderly, living longer, with more complex needs.
OK, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Now, on Monday, we reported on the huge shortfall in council budgets for social care and the alarming impact it was having on the elderly and disabled. Now, the BBC understands that councils in England will be allowed to bring forward some planned rises in council tax in order to pay for social care over the next 3 years. But crucially, there may be no significant new money and many councils are expected to struggle. Our home editor, Mark Easton, sent this report from Manchester.
A brooding Manchester tower block challenges us all. What are you doing for the kind of people who live here, seems to ask. An extra care housing project where many residents require some help with daily living. Whitebeck Court exemplifies a growing need.
OK, Betty, here's your tablets.
Thank you.
This scheme's budget's safe, but Manchester must find savings of £27 million from its adult social care provision. And even the Prime Minister accepts that in many parts of England, vital services are now under threat.
You're the only person that they see throughout the day, so they just want somebody to talk to, and when you rush in, because they've cut the time down, you don't get the time to spend and sit and talk.
They're lovely, my carers, every one of them.
How important? I mean, how would you be if they were to cut back on some of that service? And they're not going to, incidentally, but just in.
I wouldn't like it. No, I rely on them.
This is not a new crisis. Politicians have been talking about the need for radical new thinking on how we fund adult social care in England for decades. But ministers of all administrations have failed to deliver on their many promises, and that litany of failure looks set to continue.
Tomorrow it's expected that local authorities will be told they can put up council taxes to fund desperately needed services for the elderly and other vulnerable adults. But it's not quite what it seems. Local authorities in England are currently allowed to add a 2% supplement to council tax bills for the next 3 years, money that can be used to plug some of the gaps in adult social care provision. The new plan is to let them increase council tax a bit more, a bit sooner, for instance by 3% for 2 years, with nothing then in the following year. It's more flexibility, but crucially no real new money.
For every pound that has been taken out of adult social care, it has bubbled up into our acute hospital provision, as people are spending longer and longer in hospital instead of being able to go out with adequately funded care packages.
Greater Manchester's new combined authority now has control of health and social care budgets across the region and is trying to solve both the bed-blocking crisis and the shortage of high-quality adult social care by smashing traditional departmental silos.
What we are beginning to see is a reduction in the number of people, particularly vulnerable people, having to go into hospital. And we believe the reason for that is because the support that we're providing them out in the community is stopping them from falling into crisis as often.
The crisis in the care of vulnerable adults is not going to be solved by tweaks to council tax rates. Cuts to social care budgets vastly exceed the extra that local authorities are allowed to raise. The challenge from this Manchester tower block has yet to be answered. Mark Easton, BBC News, Manchester.
Council tax bills could go up by 6% over the next 2 years in an effort to tackle the crisis in social care. For someone in the average Band D property, that means a £90 increase, but with the funding shortfall more than £2.5 billion, council leaders say it won't be nearly enough. Our health and social care correspondent Victoria MacDonald is in Westminster. Victoria.
Yes, it would appear, John, that Theresa May has overcome her concerns about raising council tax and has tomorrow we will hear in the local government settlement that councils can go ahead and raise 6% extra over 3 years. Now, that can be front-loaded, so it could be 3%, and then nothing in the final year, or they could keep it at 2% for each of those 3 years. What is clear is that the government is listening to the massive concerns that this was not mentioned in the autumn statement, despite expectations. And certainly today, it dominated PMQs.
This social care crisis forces people to give up work to care for loved ones because there isn't a system to do it, makes people stay in hospital longer than they should, and leads people into a horrible, isolated life when they should be cared for by all of us through a properly funded social care system. Get a grip and fund it properly, please.
It is this government that will provide a long-term, sustainable system for social care that gives reassurance to people. But when he talks about governments ducking social care, let's look about 13 years of Labour in government.
Yes, well, you heard the Prime Minister there talking about long-term and sustainable settlement. What that is, nobody quite knows. Now, charities welcomed tomorrow's announcement that was leaked today, but they say it won't go near enough to meeting that funding gap between need and what is currently missing, £2.5 billion by the end of this Parliament. They also say the wealthier areas will raise more in the places they need it the less. And there's also the point that next year there are local authority elections. So it is not even clear yet that councils will take this opportunity to raise council tax by 3% and tell their constituents that they're going to have to pay extra.
Victoria, thanks very much.